Do you know what the US economy is worth? Well, as of 2025, it's about $30 trillion. In other words, the United States produces goods and services worth $30 trillion in 1 year. And what if we say that in just one day, the American stock market lost $4 trillion? Yes, in only 24 hours, $4 trillion vanished, with the total loss reaching $5 trillion in 3 weeks. Donald Trump wanted to boost the U.S. economy by putting tariffs, but everything backfired, resulting in a historic loss. But how did that happen? How the United States was punished so brutally when the tariffs were supposed to punish China, Canada, Mexico, and other countries? Well, the answer is how these countries responded, and how Trump signed the death sentence of the American economy. But how? In this video, let's find out. The U.S. stock market has just suffered one of its worst collapses in history, with $4 trillion in market value wiped out in a single day. This wasn't a random fluctuation. It was the direct result of Trump's reckless trade war, which has now spiraled into an economic disaster. And the numbers paint a grim picture. The Dow Jones plummeted 1.5%, the S&P 500 tumbled 2.4%, and the Nasdaq dropped nearly 2%, sending shockwaves through Wall Street. In just 3 weeks, the U.S. stock market has lost over $5 trillion, with investors fearing an imminent Trump-driven recession. Major financial institutions are already raising red flags. Goldman Sachs increased its odds of a recession from 15% to 20%, while J.P. Morgan Chase put it even higher at 40%. The markets aren't just reacting to tariffs. They are reacting to the chaos and uncertainty of Trump's economic policies. Interestingly, Donald Trump's second-term trade war was supposed to be his grand strategy to assert America's economic dominance. Instead, it has resulted in an absolute disaster, one that has backfired spectacularly, triggering economic instability, shaking investor confidence, and crippling U.S. businesses. What Trump envisioned as a masterstroke of economic nationalism has instead become one of the greatest self-inflicted wounds in modern American history. Trump's approach was straightforward: raise tariffs on China and Canada to force them into submission, impose higher taxes on foreign goods to make American companies more competitive, and use trade as a political weapon to pressure both allies and adversaries. But the results have been catastrophic. Instead of weakening its rivals, the U.S. is suffering unprecedented financial destruction. China retaliated with precision, cutting off key U.S. agricultural and tech exports, while Canada, long considered a close ally, responded with a fierce economic counterattack. Investors, rattled by the chaos, pulled billions from the market, triggering a financial meltdown that wiped out $4 trillion in a single day. What was meant to be an act of strength has instead left America economically weaker, politically isolated, and struggling to contain the fallout. If Trump believed China would fold under economic pressure, he was disastrously mistaken. Beijing had been preparing for such a confrontation for years, and when Trump escalated the trade war by raising tariffs on Chinese imports from 10% to 20%, China struck back with brutal efficiency. Its countermeasures targeted the very backbone of the American economy: agriculture and technology. Chinese officials wasted no time in imposing crippling tariffs on American wheat, corn, and poultry. Overnight, demand for U.S. farm goods collapsed, leaving American farmers drowning in unsold crops with nowhere to send them. Billions of dollars worth of shipments were abruptly canceled, forcing struggling agricultural producers to take massive losses. In a further escalation, China slashed its imports of American tech components, dealing a devastating blow to companies like Apple, Nvidia, and Tesla, businesses that rely heavily on Chinese manufacturing and consumers. The consequences were immediate. Tesla, the very company owned by Trump's ally Elon Musk, alone lost $125 billion in market value in a single day, sending shockwaves throughout the tech industry and fueling investor panic. This was no longer just a dispute over trade policies. It had become an economic war for survival. Instead of succumbing to Trump's tariffs, China has used them as an opportunity to accelerate its push toward economic self-sufficiency. Beijing has aggressively invested in domestic manufacturing, ensuring that Chinese companies can replace American suppliers. And as if this was not enough, Canada also struck back, which came as a major shock for Trump. That's because for decades, Canada has been one of America's most stable and reliable trading partners. But Trump's reckless escalation forced Ottawa's hand. Instead of backing down, Canada fought back harder than anyone anticipated, launching a series of countermeasures that dealt a crushing blow to the U.S. economy. One of the most devastating moves was Ontario's decision to impose a 25% surcharge on electricity exports to the U.S. This single measure sent shockwaves through American manufacturing, instantly raising energy costs for businesses in key states like Michigan, Minnesota, and New York. Factories that relied on cheap Canadian electricity suddenly found themselves facing skyrocketing expenses, making American goods less competitive in global markets. Some manufacturers even began considering relocating their operations to Canada to escape the economic uncertainty created by Trump's tariffs. But Canada wasn't done. Adding to the pressure, Canada retaliated with a sweeping 25% tariff on $155 billion worth of American goods, including automobiles, agricultural products, and household appliances. The price of U.S.-made cars and farm goods skyrocketed overnight, driving Canadian buyers toward European and Asian alternatives. The tariffs didn't just hurt American manufacturers. They sent shockwaves through the entire supply chain, forcing companies to raise prices and cut jobs. What was meant to protect American industries ended up crippling them instead. Before we continue further, tell us, are you enjoying the video? If yes, please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on the latest news stories on geopolitics, economics, and current affairs impacting your lives. Perhaps the most devastating move yet came when Canadian pension funds, worth a staggering $2.3 trillion, began pulling their investments out of U.S. markets. This is being seen as one of the major reasons behind the $4 trillion loss of the U.S. stock market. In response to Trump's economic aggression, Canadian investors started redirecting their capital toward domestic businesses instead. The impact was immediate. Wall Street, already reeling from trade war uncertainty, suffered one of its worst collapses in history. The panic spread across global markets, triggering sell-offs in Europe and Asia. Hedge funds, which had bet heavily on Trump's economic policies, scrambled to offload their stocks, further accelerating the market downturn. Confidence in the U.S. economy eroded rapidly as businesses began slashing investments and putting expansion plans on hold. However, as the U.S. economy teeters on the edge of a full-blown recession, Donald Trump refuses to acknowledge the consequences of his reckless tariff war. Instead of addressing the stock market's collapse and the panic among investors, Trump remains defiant, insisting that his trade policies are part of a larger plan to restore America's economic dominance. In an interview, he dismissed mounting recession warnings with an air of overconfidence, stating, "We're bringing wealth back to America. That's a big thing. It takes time." This statement, however, rings hollow as trillions vanish from the markets, businesses cut back on expansion, and consumers brace for higher prices. Meanwhile, the White House has attempted to downplay the financial turmoil, releasing a carefully crafted statement that claims, "President Trump delivered historic job, wage, and investment growth in his first term, and is set to do so again." But Wall Street isn't convinced. The business world is watching in horror as Trump's erratic trade war policies create an environment of instability and uncertainty. Major corporations that once supported his economic agenda are now feeling the sting of his tariffs. Delta Airlines, for instance, recently announced that its profit forecasts had been slashed in half, citing economic uncertainty as a major factor. The airline's stock price plummeted by 14% in a single day, signaling deep concern among investors about the long-term consequences of Trump's actions. Confidence in corporate leadership, which had been at a 3-year high just months ago, has now collapsed. CEOs are canceling expansion plans, slashing investments, and preparing for tougher times ahead. The fear of prolonged economic instability is no longer a distant possibility. It's already unfolding. Even former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers, who has long been critical of Trump's economic policies, issued a warning. Calling Trump's tariff war the worst trade policy yet, Summers predicted that if the administration continues down this path, the U.S. could be facing a deep and prolonged economic downturn. You should know that the $4 trillion stock market wipeout isn't just a problem for investors. It's a ticking time bomb for the entire U.S. economy. Market crashes don't just erase wealth on Wall Street. They have a direct impact on businesses, workers, and everyday consumers. The effects of this economic disaster are already beginning to manifest in ways that will make life harder for millions of Americans. Businesses that once flourished under the promise of Trump's pro-business policies are now being forced to make difficult choices to stay afloat. Major corporations, especially those reliant on international trade, are laying off employees to offset rising costs. Industries that depend on global supply chains, such as manufacturing and technology, are shrinking as tariffs drive up the prices of essential components. The ripple effects of the stock market crash will also be felt at the consumer level. Prices on everyday goods are set to rise as businesses pass their increased costs onto shoppers. Families will see their purchasing power dwindle as inflation eats away at wages. Meanwhile, foreign investors who have historically played a crucial role in strengthening the U.S. economy are now pulling out in record numbers, redirecting their funds to more stable markets. And the worst part? This is only the beginning. If Trump continues down this path, the U.S. will suffer even deeper economic losses. Wall Street analysts are already predicting that the stock market could see further declines, potentially wiping out another $1 trillion in value. Mass layoffs will become more common as businesses struggle to cope with rising costs and declining consumer confidence. The recession that economists have been warning about could become a reality, plunging the U.S. economy into a downturn that could take years to recover from. What do you think? Will the United States economy face more disaster if Trump continues putting tariffs? Do you feel Trump is self-harming the American economy, while the countries he wants to challenge, like China and Canada, are benefiting like never before? In the comment section right below, share your thoughts on what might happen next in the trade war and who will win. Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We bring the latest news stories on geopolitics, economics, changing world order, and current affairs. Things you need to stay informed. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.